I might be banned from a couple of countries after doing this video. But you guys like the Europe one, or some of you liked it, others sent very upset emails. So let's fix Asia's borders. Again, don't take these too seriously, they're just for fun. It's just creating a hypothetical scenario and making us think about the current borders that we have and how those borders could or could not change. I'm not advocating for any country to disappear, lose, or gain territory in a serious manner. By the way, I didn't make these decisions all on my own. A few people over on my Patreon presented their suggestions as well. So if you want to take part in this video making process every now and then, make sure to support me on Patreon as well. Now, let's get into it. Let's start with Cyprus. I know Cyprus is European, but geographically it is closer to Asia, so I included it here. Today, Cyprus is divided between North and South, Turkish and Greek respectively, with a demilitarized zone in between and some British bases throughout. I think the reunification of the island is inevitable, and so that is the first redesign of Asia's borders that I would make. Then we move on to Turkey. A lot of people were upset that in the Europe video I annexed East Thrace to Greece, so okay, in the scenario, Turkey gets to keep it. But on the other hand, there's something that I think should change here that might upset Turkish people even more: Kurdistan. When you look at an ethnic map of Turkey, you clearly identify a regional prevalence of Kurds in the southeast. This presence of ethnic Kurds is common throughout parts of Syria, Iran, and Iraq too. Further ahead, we will see how that would impact those countries as well, but in this scenario, I think a free Kurdistan would be essential. Moving on to the Caucasus region, it's pretty interesting. Armenia, I think, needs to annex Nakhchivan. It already lost Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan, so this would work as a trade-off, kind of. I would also remove all of these tiny exclaves that ruin a cleaner border that we could have. In the intersection between Armenia, Turkey, and the new Kurdistan, we would have a little bit of a mess. So I think it would make sense for Kurdistan to retreat a little for that sake. I mean, they're already getting a huge portion of territory. I think they would be okay with that. Azerbaijan could keep its current borders for now. There's a big change coming up for them too. While in Georgia's case, it would be reunified, annexing the breakaway Russian puppet regions of Abkhazia and Ossetia. In Iran's case, it would also lose a significant portion of its western territory, currently the set of provinces within Iran where Kurds are a majority. It would also lose more land further north. When you look at an ethnic map, again, of Iran, you see how this area is mostly populated by Azerbaijani people. So I think it would make sense for Azerbaijan to expand there and more than double their territory. I think they would forgive me for losing Nakhchivan if this was the gain. Before we keep going, I want to take a minute to thank the sponsor of this video and friend of the channel, ClioVis. ClioVis is a tool that allows you to create timelines for presentations at school or just for yourself so that you can learn about a specific topic in a visual way. I like it because it's super easy to learn, it's very intuitive, and it has tools like having different categories so that you can have different timelines and understand parallel issues at the same time. In addition, you can connect events to each other and really understand chains of causality between different things that you are trying to visualize. Their team is super responsive and helpful, so if you have any doubts, you can always reach out to them and they will be ready to help you. They are great for learning, for storytelling, and for using it inside the classroom or outside of it. It's great for teachers, students, or anyone that just loves to learn. Right now, they are running a promotion, and so if you use the code GK50, you get 50% off your subscription, but you can also try the tool completely for free, so click the link in the description and try it out. I really recommend it. Now, let's get back to the video. And let's wrap up the Middle East before we keep moving to Central and to East Asia. Because nothing wrong ever came from a European trying to draw borders in the Middle East, right? First, Syria. When I started writing this video, I was going to divide Syria into various countries based on the control lines of the internal conflict, but over the past weekend, the regime fell and the rebels took over. Part of the country, the northeast, is still controlled by the Kurds, but that would just become a part of our united Kurdistan, so I think the rest of Syria would remain whole. Adding to it the Golan Heights, these are already part of Syria from a legal point of view, being occupied by Israel since 1981. Which I guess brings us to the troubled region of Lebanon, Palestine, and Israel. Now, Lebanon would stay as it is. I don't see a reason to add or remove any territory from it. For Israel and Palestine, I think either a recovery of the UN plan for a two-state solution from 1947 could be a good idea. Is it realistic for the current situation? No. Is it possible for the current situation? I don't think so either, but we're living in an ideal world scenario where no conflict would come from these changes. I guess another hypothesis would be to keep the current borders and they just accept each other in peace. In Jordan's case, I would keep its current territory, but I would propose a union with Iraq's Sunni territories. Iraq is split in this Muslim division, only the southeast is Shia, and I think the strong stability of Jordan as a country in the Middle East could help stabilize the mess that is Western Iraq. That minority area revolving around Baghdad could become a smaller and more stable Iraq. I also noticed I had forgotten part of the Kurdish area outside of Kurdistan, so that new country just got a little bit bigger. Kuwait would stay as it is. I think a territory makes sense and it's a stable country considering the regional and historical context. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, I was kind of unsure what to do. Before unifying fully in 1932, the peninsula of Arabia was made up of various emirates, sheikdoms, and kingdoms. I don't think a full return of that and a full balkanization of it now would make sense, but it would be very cool to see a remade kingdom of Hedjaz on the west coast, developing a culture and economy around the Red Sea, with the rest of Saudi remaining together and still having access to the Red Sea in the south. And this is a good example of a country that doesn't really make sense to create, but it would just be fun to look at. And again, reinforcing, this is just all for fun. It's not to be taken seriously. Qatar, the UAE, and Oman seem like they should stay as they are too. The UAE is already a union in itself. Oman has its own identity, sort of mixing some type of Indian and Middle Eastern identity, and Qatar is territorially disconnected, so in this scenario those three would stay the same. Oh, actually I would fix something, the exclave situation, where Oman has some land inside and after the UAE being territorially disconnected from the rest of the country, so in this case I would annex those to the Emirates. Sorry, Oman. Moving to Yemen, there I think there needs to be a partition. Yemen has been involved in a serious and deep internal conflict for years now. It used to be 2 to 3 separate kingdoms, then being united, mostly for colonial reasons. So I think that a tri-partition of Yemen would be useful here, with Yemen as a whole disappearing and 3 new countries being created. North Yemen, South Yemen, and South Arabia to the east, which would also keep the islands of Socotra. So now that we're done with the Middle East, let's move on to the Central Asia region and then to East Asia. I thought a lot about what could be done with the Central Asia Istans because they do have very much their own identities. So perhaps keeping them exactly as they are would make sense. But is this a video where things make sense? The unbelievable mess that are the borders between Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan also led me to not even want to try to figure out how to fix them, and so I considered uniting them all into a single Turkish state. The organization of Turkish states already exists, although Tajikistan isn't a member. I didn't know that. They have often talked about uniting further, so I think this would be a way of creating a super strong power in Central Asia. In addition, alone they are more exposed to Russian or Chinese influence, while together they may be strong enough to keep any foreign interests away. And now let's move a little bit to the south to other stans of Central Asia, Pakistan and Afghanistan. These two are very different countries, but the reality is they have a couple population groups that live across both of their borders. And if we overlay this ethnic map of both countries, we can see that. Pakistan is essentially split into 4 groups. Baloch in the southwest, which also stretches slightly into Afghanistan and actually want independence since the British left, Sindhi in the southeast, Punjabi in the northeast, and then Pashtun in the west, which also takes up roughly the southern half of Afghanistan. The north is split between various groups, many of which are Turkic minorities within the country in Afghanistan, coming from the Central Asia countries that border them. So I think a good reorganization of this territory would be the annexation of these areas by the new Turkic Federation, and Pashtunistan to be created across the border, a free Balochistan in the south, and 2 extra countries in the east, Sindistan and Punjabistan. Which brings us to India. Before unification, India was organized into various semi-autonomous regions called princely states under British rule. While I don't think repeating this division would be a good idea because a common Indian identity does exist today and the regional differences don't seem very intense, but correct me if I am wrong, it still would be interesting to see an India with slightly different borders. Perhaps the Punjabi area could unite with an independent Punjabistan, Kashmir could be independent, and Bangladesh could expand into a full united Bengal, which was actually part of the British partition plan at the start with the creation of a third sovereign state there. As we know, it ended up not happening immediately. We could see the return of Sikkim as a third Himalayan kingdom along with Nepal and Bhutan. Down south, Sri Lanka would continue to exist independently, as would the Maldives. And the rest of India could return to a sort of pre-British partition time with a number of stronger regional identities, but still united in a sort of Indian confederation of semi-sovereign states. And since I probably just made 1.4 billion people potentially upset at me, let's do the same for another 1.4 billion, moving on to China. Despite being so big, China isn't that different when it comes to ethnic groups throughout its territory. Sure, there are regional differences like Manchu or Han, but a common Chinese identity exists, I would say, in a similar or even bigger way than India. So the only changes I would conceive as being possible here would be the following. First, the confirmation of an independent Taiwan, with the Republic of China removing its claim on the mainland and the PRC accepting its sovereignty. Then a release of Tibet as a free sovereign nation, as well as a release of Uyghuristan, a new Turkish country too, not a part of the Turkish Union but allied to it in compromise. And finally, an expansion of Mongolia proper into Chinese Mongolia, bringing Mongolians that live inside China back into their homeland. Then, next, we have the 2 Koreas and Japan. Japan is kind of a no-brainer. I think it would roughly stay the same. The only thing I considered was the idea of Hokkaido being independent, as it is the home of the native Ainu people who are different than the rest of the Japanese, but there's very few Ainu left. Maybe if we assigned the Russian Sakhalin island to them too, where Ainu also come from, it would make more sense. We could also give independence back to the Ryukyu Islands, once called the Venice of Asia. For Korea, a simple reunification would make sense. Which finally brings us to Southeast Asia to wrap up this video. With Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos being temporarily united during colonial times as French Indochina, I don't think that a return to that would make that much sense. I would therefore keep those separated and as they are. When you look at an ethnic map of the rest of these countries, there doesn't seem to be much division or union to be made either. There are various groups across Myanmar and Thailand, but very few cross-existent borders. At most, we could maybe create a sovereign Rohingya state within Myanmar to safeguard the Muslim minority there, which I guess could potentially unite with Bengal since it borders it, considering Bangladesh is also Muslim and is already a direct escape route for many of these people today. Further south, maybe Malaysia could split in two. It's quite odd that part of the country exists on the mainland and the other half on quite a distant island, although I know the people are all Malay, but here for the sake of the hypothetical scenario, perhaps Singapore could expand into continental Malaysia, while the island Malaysia could absorb Borneo. The Philippines, I think, could stay the same. There's a very small region in the south that is majority Muslim, contrasting to the rest of the Catholic country, and it does ask for independence, but it's so small that I don't think it makes sense to include it here. And finally, for Indonesia, could it split perhaps into its own confederation of semi-autonomous countries based on each island, with West Papua uniting with Papua New Guinea into a single Papuan island nation, and Timor-Leste and Bali staying independent, the former potentially expanding into the rest of its island. So, what do you think of this redesign of the borders of Asian countries? Let me know in the comments. I'm sure I made a million mistakes and failed to take a bunch of things into account, especially if you're from one of these countries. Educate me, tell me why it would or wouldn't work. And again, remember, this is for fun, not to be taken seriously. But I am very excited to read your comments. Do you think any of these have a real chance of happening? Would you like that to be the case? Let me know. Also, if there are any changes that I didn't mention that you think could happen, tell me what those are too. Thank you again to my patrons for helping make this video. Thank you for their support in making these videos possible. If you want to join our community there, I would really recommend that you do so. If not, that's totally fine. Either way, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge. I think the feeling that, or the proof that I'm getting old is that I think I hurt my back putting on my jacket earlier. I don't have a Moomin cup today. I have this one. It's pretty. It has some flowers, ornaments. It's from IKEA. There you go. And before you click away from the video, remember to try out ClioVis. They are a really cool tool to build timelines and allow you to either present a topic or learn about a topic in a very visual way. I really recommend it. You won't regret trying it out.